Welcome to My Body, My Bump, My Baby, where we help women be empowered, intentional mothers. This podcast is best enjoyed sipping tea or taking a stroll in nature. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be substituted for professional psychological or medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, midwife, or other qualified health provider with any questions about your personal situation, health, or medical condition.
Today, we're going to be talking about empowered decision-making and how empowered decision-making can impact you not only in your pregnancy, but also in your life as becoming a mama, with your families, in your personal decisions that you make. Healthcare, everything has something to do with empowered decision-making. So what we're going to start with is looking at what is informed consent. So informed consent is two parts. So it starts with having enough information to make an informed decision while still remaining and holding your locus of control. According to the American Heritage Dictionary, informed consent is consent by a person to undergo a medical procedure, participate in a clinical trial, or be counseled by a professional such as a social worker or lawyer after receiving all material information regarding risks, benefits, and alternatives. We're going to dig a little bit more into that when we discuss one of the acronyms that we like to make sure that we have mamas informed on.
So let's share that acronym.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that we like to teach our mamas here at ENSO is the BRAIN acronym. And when you break it down, the B is for benefits, the R is for risks, A for alternatives, I for intuition, and then N is nothing. And I love the American Heritage Dictionary definition, but I think that it leaves a little bit of the personal part of it, like the part of being a human part of it, out. So
yeah, the intuition
aspect
of it for sure. I agree with that.
The intuition and the nothing, the American Heritage definition kind of makes it seem like you have to do something. And I think maybe that comes, I love that it's from American Heritage because I think it has to do a lot with our culture. We're a doy kind of culture. Like, what can we do to fix this? Always something has to be done. And actually that's not true. Sometimes doing nothing is actually
doing something.
The right thing to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're still doing something. You just might not be doing what they're telling you to do.
Yeah.
Or someone's telling you to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So, B, in your experience as a doula, can you give an example of a mama using their BRAIN acronym to make a decision? Yeah,
I think that this is something that comes up, my guess is it would come up in almost every birth, whether you had planned this beautiful, unmedicated home birth or birth center birth, or whether you were like, I'm just going to, pop on into the hospital, I'm going to get my epidural and just wait for my baby to arrive. At some point in that journey, most of the time, we are going to hit a crossroad. And in that crossroad, we're going to be left with having to make a decision that was not planned. And maybe we have all of the information and maybe we don't. And I think what comes up for informed consent is you don't want to be in that crossroad without having gathered some information about what could possibly come up in a situation, because then it's very, very difficult to go through benefits, risks, alternatives. You still have intuition, but you're going to question yourself because you don't have benefits, risks, and
right there
and alternatives. Yeah, right. And so you're left with whatever the the medical support people are providing you, and typically what they'll provide you is what they think is the best course of action in that moment. I think the problem is that they don't know you like you know you, and they don't know your partner and your family and your story, and so they basically are making the decision based on just physical, what's happening in that moment, putting that together with their educated knowledge about them. But, it really falls short because it's just about the body and what's happening with the body. But none of us are like a bag of bones and flesh without feelings and thoughts. And so, attacking it that way leaves us open for walking out of a situation with a lot of trauma, which happens a lot for women.
And every single woman is different, is what you're getting at too, is you have different intuition, but you also have different genetics, you have different predispositions, you have different desires, you have a different makeup than someone else next to you. And every single pregnancy that you have and every single child you have is different too. And a lot of times what happens in that medical system is if you're just getting the information from a healthcare provider and not bringing in these other pieces of like your intuition, alternative, the option to do nothing, is they're creating the standard of care that is most average and most basic that they know of, sometimes as it relates to science, and sometimes things aren't even updated, and what it can be too. So I love the example, and I'm going to ask you to go a little bit more into this, but just a very in-depth example of sweeping membranes, and having the option to have your membranes swept for pregnancy, and really using the brain in this decision, or also in looking at what informed consent is for it.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know what that means, there is often a time late in pregnancy, usually as we're getting closer to our due date, or if for some reason the medical provider wants the baby to arrive sooner rather than later. One thing they might recommend is sweeping membranes. And if you've never heard of that in the moment and your provider is suggesting it, and obviously they are the person that you hired to have all of the knowledge to help you get through this, without any background information on whether that makes sense for you, you're most likely going to consent because you were told that's probably the best option in this situation. And typically the scenario goes something like this. We really want you to have this baby within the next week. Sometimes mamas are feeling uncomfortable. So it's also sometimes provided as an option like, hey, if we do this thing, maybe baby will come and you're going to get a lot more comfortable a lot quicker. And that's usually about the extent of the information that you're given. So as a person who has attended a lot of births, what I have seen with sweeping the membranes is, it's just not a guarantee that that's going to cause labor to come. I would say it's really 50-50. So those are not really good odds. The procedure itself is not comfortable, so the provider will stick their finger inside the vagina and actually like rub their finger under the membranes and try to separate a little bit. So that causes like a burning sensation. It doesn't feel good. And then when you leave the office, you usually have some cramping and some bleeding. A lot of women are actually surprised by that because they weren't told that potentially they're going to start bleeding a little bit, but that's normal part of that procedure. And they go home with all of this discomfort and the hope of this baby is going to come like tonight, and they're uncomfortable for a day or two, and then they're pregnant for another week and a half. I would say, it's obviously, it's a good choice sometimes. I think, sometimes it is a good idea to do, but I think that the point is it's probably if you had more information about, is this going to work? How is it going to feel? What does it look like for the next day or two when I go home? Would you have made the same decision as you would have if they just said, hey, let's try this thing and we think that it'll make the baby come sooner and you'll be more comfortable? Those are two, right? Mm-hmm. Like weighing those two options are so different.
Very, very different. And I think it gets into the point around, to have true empowered decision making, you have to do your own research. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes what happens is we get caught up in the moment of being in that appointment or with the doctor, or we're in the hospital in a setting where we're in labor, like you mentioned, the epidural aspect of it. But it's really going in, doing your research, reading both sides. So not just following the crowd and going one side, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit more depth. But it's also asking questions to your provider or anyone that you're speaking to. It is their job. You have hired them. You pay them. They don't pay you. It is their job to be able to find information for you. And if they don't, and you don't feel comfortable with that, you have options to find a different provider as well. It's really just, overall, to sum it up, it's digging deep and digging deeper into the information.
And in the end, if you're in, it can be overwhelming. I understand, especially when you are in a doctor's office or something to that effect. And somebody who has a lot of education and experience and training is telling you these things, it can be very intimidating to actually ask those questions that you are feeling like you need to make your decision that is right for you and for your baby. And I think that sometimes we do get into a place where there's maybe the little deer in the headlights, kind of like, that's whatever you're telling me right now is big, and my brain just went blank, which is one of the reasons why we call it brain.
Yeah, that's funny. That's a good one.
To kind of remind ourselves, like when we have that moment where our brain is just like, to stop and hopefully ask those questions. And you can internalize the questions, so we can, okay, they just recommended that I do this procedure called sweeping my membranes. The benefits, well, she or he, the provider just said, well, the benefit is that I would feel better soon because my baby will come. And of course I want my baby to come. I'm very excited to hold and meet my baby. Risks. Did they mention
any risks?
Yeah. So then that might be a time to just
ask.
A
trigger. Yeah. To know the BRAIN acronym can then just be it can essentially drive how you have every conversation around decisions that you need to make for yourself, your baby. And you mentioned this of like making the right decision for yourself. You don't need to justify your decision to anyone other than yourself, your child, and your spouse or your partner if they're a part of the decision making too. Learning this is a transition. You learn it, and I think from my experience, it becomes a lot heavier in pregnancy to start learning this, but it is preparing you for motherhood.
Right.
Because when you transition into motherhood, you are no longer responsible for me, myself, and I. You are responsible for a we. And you're responsible for your baby and your children and their health. And it really just opens doors to build that confidence.
Exactly. One of the things that we tell our families in our childbirth classes is the decisions that you make are yours to keep, which means that whatever the outcome is, whether, it's a great outcome or it's not so great, the only people that really live with that outcome in the end is you and your family. And this is a big deal, because if you put it in that kind of light, it does start to change your opinion when you have friends or maybe even your close family, like your mother or your sister or your mother-in-law, really pushing you towards something that was right for them, but for whatever reason in your mama heart does not feel right to you. It's really easy to be able to kind of get swayed and moved into that direction, especially if there's a lot of people, if it's not just
like following the crowd.
Yeah, if there's just a ton, like everybody you talk to keeps saying, "Oh my God, why are you doing it that way?" Or I hear this a lot, there's a lot of emotional shaming, like, "How dare you?" People are told that often, like, "How dare you? You're endangering your child. You're maybe, God forbid we go into the vaccine things, we won't. But like if it was a vaccine thing, you're endangering my child, and it can be very heated and very hard to stand in your own power. And in order to do that, first you have to find it, right?
Yes, finding the power is huge. And that's where the empowered piece comes from. So we call it informed consent. But in reality, it's shifting into that idea of you have the power, or you are empowered to make decisions.
Yes.
And going back to the justification piece on it, the amount of times that I myself am questioned for data because of the decisions that I make for myself and my family is a lot. And I have come to realize that I cannot be overly concerned about what the people around me think about the decisions that I make, because in the end, like you mentioned, it is me that is impacted by the decisions. It is my family that is impacted with those decisions, and those decisions that we make is what we will live with, not what our neighbors, our parents, our families, our friends, just regular Joe or Jane on the street. It's what we're going to live with, and that's why it's only our decision to make.
Right, and painting that picture when you have a newborn or even a toddler, I mean, that's hour by hour, day by day, middle of the night, all day during the day. Like those things you live with, and everybody else gets to go home to their comfortable family and their comfortable situation. And it's not always giant and dire and huge. Sometimes these are like tiny little things. But sometimes tiny little things, bunches of them, turn into a mountain, right? And so, yes, absolutely. The idea with informed consent is holding on to our locus of control and making decisions from a place where we feel like we've done enough education, enough research, whatever the research looks like. Research could be polling. I have a girlfriend who loves to poll. She'll just randomly pick up people at, the sandwich shop and be like, "What do you think about this?" Right. So if you're a poller, you can do polling, but also get the evidence-based information. So once you have all of that and you've checked in with yourself, like what does my intuition say?
What is my gut saying?
Yeah.
What's coming from my stomach? What's coming from my heart?
Right. Exactly. Then we're making informed decisions and we're holding our locus of control. We're not giving it away. What would you do? What do you think? Are you okay with me doing this? Right? Always asking. That's just giving it away. That's not truly making a decision.
When you use the word you oftentimes, that's when you know there is we need to turn it back to me internally. Or, yes, you're going to have you in a conversation with a partner, but it really needs to come back in internally.
Right. Or should.
Yeah, what should I do?
What should I do?
Because my question as a coach is likely going to be back to you. What do you think you should do?
Right.
And it becomes a different conversation then when it goes full circle back around. Because what I do is not equal to what you do. And your child is not what my child is.
And our stories are not the same. Let me give you like a dramatic contrast, right? I was born in the United States. My family is a Catholic family. So I was taught these things from that perspective. If you were born in China, and maybe you have a whole different set of ways to live and ways to move through this world. When we come together and I ask, me, the American Catholic, asks the woman who was born in China, who maybe she's a Buddhist, if we want to, like, you know, apples to apples or whatever. And I ask, well, what would you do? Well, her culture is so darn different than mine that it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because they're not going to necessarily align. There might be parts that align, but there's probably going to be big parts that just don't make sense. And in that scenario, it's very obvious. I think we can see it. But when it's friend to friend or mom to daughter, it's a little more difficult to kind of stand back and say, hey, even mom to daughter, right? She might have been born in an era that didn't have as many resources as we have. And so her perspective is shaded by her experience at that time. So much has changed since then.
And I love that too. If you look back historically at those differences, we have seen changes over time, but that's a whole other podcast probably.
Yeah, right. Knowing the history is fantastic. There's great books out there to get a little bit more information on that. But that could also be part of your journey. The wonderful thing about pregnancy, and this doesn't hold only in pregnancy, this also holds after baby comes, and it goes forever and ever. But one of the wonderful things about pregnancy is we have about 10 months to make this journey, like find our power, find how to stand in our own strength and our own will, and also find a way to know what is right for us and be okay with that once we make the decision.
And it can change. I want to remind people that you can be thinking one thing before pregnancy that and it completely shifts towards the end or into motherhood. It can be very, very different. And oftentimes we discuss, like in my practice with clients, I discuss values. And I always want to reiterate that values shift over time and they are allowed to change. And you mentioned finding your power. Pregnancy is such a critical time for this. You are literally holding a fireball of a baby in your solar plexus or around your solar plexus, which is, if you know chakras, that is like your chakra of power. And there is something special about that and something just, I don't know, amazing about that experience that really does turn it on for you. I love that piece of.
And I think a lot of women feel it.
Yes.
I think they feel it. They might not know exactly what it is, but I think a lot of women do feel that. And that usually ignites the seeking, like they're looking for something. And most of the time, I don't think we quite know what we're looking for. We just know that we have embarked on a big journey and we're supposed to be seeking something.
And allow yourself to feel. Allow yourself to feel that. Repressing that is not going to make you feel right. And it doesn't, and this is where you have the opportunity to seek information and data. Ask questions to those around you. Set some boundaries for yourself when you're asking those questions, though. I love to coach women on boundaries around that, because it doesn't mean that someone tells you something and then you immediately have to like take that into yourself. You might be able to take that information and put it in a box over here and then put something else over here and then sort through that and see what feels right to you, what feels right to your intuition. Asking questions, doing research to like seek that information, reading books. I love like reading books on different cultures. Like you mentioned, like for example, a Chinese woman or a woman in China that's birthing a baby and what she does versus someone in the U.S. It's really, really cool to compare the different cultures, because it allows us to recognize that there are so many different perspectives and allows us to learn the character strength of perspective and really start to understand that there is no one right way. Your way can be your right way.
Yes.
And someone else's way can be their right way. It's
Yes.
not the wrong way ever.
Right.
Anyone.
And your right way for this event, maybe this pregnancy, also could be very different on the next pregnancy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're just stepping into it from where we are in that moment. And ideally that should change, right? If we are on a life journey of growing and evolving, then each time we find ourselves in a situation where we are having to make an informed decision, then each time maybe we're coming with a different story, a different strength, a different background, and we're approaching it ideally in a stronger way, in a better positioned way, but it can change over time, which I love.
It can absolutely change. And it kind of goes into the implementation of like how to pull all this together too. And really, it comes back to knowing your why. And that goes into your values and determining your values and then determine what your greater why is. And that shifts, it might shift from one child to the next, from one pregnancy to the next. But all in all, aren't we all just trying to have the best pregnancy or the best birth experience, the best motherhood experience, or give our children the best opportunities that we have?
Absolutely. And when you say that, that brings me to the thought of the perfectionist. So this kind of concept that we're talking about can be very difficult, I think, for the perfectionist, or, maybe it's not just the perfectionist, but it's the mama who really likes to feel in control. For the perfectionist, there sometimes is that debilitating feeling about, what if I get it wrong? Mm-hmm. What if I make a mistake? What if I decide not to listen to everybody who's telling me to do this one thing, when my intuition and my research says I should go this other way? What if it all goes wrong and it doesn't turn out perfect, right? Then what do I do with that? I think maybe for some people are hearing us say, stand in your power, make your decisions, and do what's right for you. But then there's the always and what if I fail? Mm-hmm. How do I deal with that?
And that's a tough question. It's a tough thing to work through. And I work with women all the time around this, because women are typically more of that perfectionist nature too. And it's something to just understand that there is not exactly a tangent, but there is a book called The 4 Agreements. And one of those agreements is always doing your best. Yeah. But when you truly understand that doing your best doesn't mean the same thing from every single day to day, moment to moment, year to year, career to career, day in motherhood to day in motherhood, pregnancy to pregnancy, it is different every single day. And truly just doing your best one day may be taking a nap, and doing your best another day may be working 8 hours and just knocking out a big strategic project that you were working on. It's still doing your best, whether you're taking a nap or whether you're doing that project. And it's finding that mindset and ability to feel okay with changes from day to day. And I love that piece of it.
I love the 4 agreements, and I think that we'll end up talking about it a ton, because I think you and I approach so much from that perspective. One thing that I would like to say for the perfectionist and the person who is worried about failing or making a mistake is this life and this world is duality. You can't have sunshine all of the time, because it's not as brilliant without the dark, right? Mm-hmm. And the same is true in life. We can't have perfection 100% of the time, because it's not as brilliant without the failures. So every time we fumble, every time we trip, every time we fall, it is an opportunity to make ourselves better and to grow. And so rather than looking at, yes, maybe we did make the wrong decision, and we can see that hindsight looking back, like, oh shoot, I missed this one thing, and now I understand why it was a mistake. But now we know that one thing. Now we have that knowledge. Now we have that growth, and we didn't have it before. We did the best in that moment with what we had. And now that we're on the other side, we know more. Here's a great example of that. I hear this all of the time. I will have a woman come into our yoga class, and this is her second pregnancy, and she will come in with a birth story that's traumatic, and it usually goes something like this. I got pregnant, I went to my doctor, and I basically just did all of the things that they told me to do, and I was doing all of those things perfectly. And I got to labor, I went to the hospital, all of these things happened, and I came out, and it was the most traumatic experience I've ever experienced. And I was surprised, and I was shocked, and I had no idea that that's where I was headed. And now I came out of it, and there is a new fire in me. The fire is, why did that happen to me? And why didn't I know?
Digging into the why, the root. Compliance is not a guarantee of perfection.
Right.
And those experiences that we have where we may have been compliant or just followed the crowd or what we were told to do can be the most powerful learning experiences in our lives that then set up that, you said the firestorm or power, like it sets yourself up for being empowered in the decisions you make later on.
Right.
And it goes into your little toolbox of, okay, now I've had this experience. Maybe I'm going to learn why and learn what I could have done alternatively.
Yes.
And therefore, my intuition is telling me in this pregnancy I should be doing this, which is different than I did last time.
Right. Rewrite the story. I'm going to write a new story.
Yep.
And this story comes with eyes wide open about where I've just come from, and knowing these particular pieces of that story did not work for me. And now I'm kind of like a huntress. I'm looking, I'm searching. What can work for me? Is that my only option? Right? But that's a fantastic example of, I did my best. I did what I thought was the right things to do.
That's your best at that point in time.
Right.
Yeah.
And it did not suit me.
And you learn that. It did not suit me. Okay, what does suit you? So, in wrapping up this conversation, I definitely want to bring to light again that BRAIN acronym, just as a reminder, and maybe you have a pen and paper around you that you can write it down or jot it down on your phone. But again, B stands for benefits, the R stands for risks, A is alternatives, I intuition, and N is nothing, literally do nothing. And it plays into empowered decision making and our ability to make informed decisions, because we as women, as mamas, can truly go out into the world and gather all of the information, listen internally to ourselves, and make whatever decision is right for ourselves and our families. Do you have anything else you want to add in, B?
Yeah, I would say, it's difficult when we don't know what we don't know. So don't delay, start your journey. If there is something in you that you are feeling that pull of I'm seeking something, I don't know what it is, just step out. Maybe pick up some books that find, like, you're like, that sounds a little bit interesting. Maybe you find like the beginning of what you're searching for there, and maybe you don't. Join a community, like Enso. Yes, where we have the prenatal yoga, where we get to chat with other women and hear how they're approaching it and what's working for them and what's not working for them, and start to learn about the variety of options that are available for you in your area. But give yourself time. Don't bury your head in the sand until you're too close to have enough time to do the gathering that you need to do, so that you can make those empowered decisions.
Or take classes too. And so offers classes that are wonderful to learn about the various stages of labor, even just pregnancy and birth. I think it's phenomenal. Or seek one-on-one help with, like, I'm a holistic health coach, and I work with prenatal women and postpartum women, and that's a wonderful way to really challenge yourself to dig into what those values are. Start listening to your intuition and your gut, and make decisions that are right for you and your family. All in all, just gather information and give yourself time.
I love it. Thank you for joining us today. We love having you. We love being here and getting to share little nuggets of wisdoms from our experience and our training. We hope that you'll join us again soon.